Here at the Canadian Club, we have always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas and inform the most relevant and compelling conversations of our time.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome, welcome to our 125th celebration. Are you having a good time? Well, I hope you have as good a time as we did pulling it together. The history that we got to go through and the memories we got to relive and the pictures of some of you in your youth. It was really, really lovely to have you all here. We got to reflect on the profound changes Canada, and therefore the club, has gone through over the past 125 years. I'm lucky to be able to learn from the important history of the club and Canada and help shape its future. I don't know if you heard me. I'm Colleen Kennedy, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club Toronto. Thank you. I'd like to begin this evening by introducing, speaking of the future and our nation's journey towards reconciliation. I wish to welcome our special guest this evening, Nyle Johnston, a member of the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation, an artist and traditional helper. He's going to get us started in a good way. Miigwech, we'll see you. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce myself in my language. The language I'm going to be speaking is Anishinaabe Wynne. And then I'll do my best to transcribe back into English. Nanabo wish conseil migize ne dijnikaz. Ame migwen say suck ni nda sokanak. Ame migwen say suck ni dodem. Ni a shignigaming ni donjaba meanwa tikadanto ni donjaba meanwa mishi makanak Anishinaabe aki ni donjaba. My name to creation is Wishkonsei Migize, or Whistling Eagle. I'm from the Little People clan. The little ones are my ancestors. And I grew up on my traditional territory of the Sakin Anishinaabe King, which is also known as the Bruce Peninsula. My reserve is known as Cape Croker. We call it Nea Shignikming, or the land surrounded by water on three sides. And I wanted to open this night in a good way, with good intention. With a good mind and with a good heart. The eagle in my nation, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the eagle carries the teaching of love. And it's my responsibility to always put that love forward, to always lead with love. I wanted to acknowledge the land and all of the many nations that have called this beautiful territory of the Great Lakes home, the Wendat, the Mississauga, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, but also remember that there's so many more family members that call this territory home as well. The white pine, the white-tailed deer, Wawashkeshe. So I want to call upon us all to remember our obligation to creation and our obligation to this beautiful land and water that we have such an amazing blessing to be able to call home. I was very fortunate when I was growing up to apprentice with traditional storytellers, that being my great-grandmother, Wynne Johnston, as well as another author and storyteller, Johnston. They taught me a lot about creation stories. And there are many creation stories from all around the world. They're so beautiful, and they're so valid. And I was able to learn the creation stories of the Anishinaabe. One of my teachers, Basil, after storytelling at a school, was looking at me, and he looked irritated. And I asked what was going on. He told me that people today, we like to disconnect ourselves from our creation stories. We disconnect ourselves. It's something that's happened in the past. And he told me, Nyle, in actuality, our creation stories are evolving and they're happening right now. We are ongoing participants within these creation stories. And ever since I heard that, it really shook me. Because I have to remember, a couple hundred years from now, we're going to be the ancestors. We will be the ancestors. And people will be telling stories about us. That's why now it is my obligation to my nation, to my family, to myself, and to the broader people that I get to call community now. Everyone here from all parts of the world, we get to come together in this territory and call each other family and community. And I have to remind myself, what kind of story do I want to leave for the future generations? That's all. Miigwech. Thank you.
Good evening, members and guests. My name is Joseph Lowe, president of Canadian Club Toronto, and on behalf of the club, all our volunteers, all our staff, a warm welcome. Nyle, on behalf of Canadian Club Toronto, please accept my sincerest thanks for your powerful acknowledgement, certainly of these Indigenous lands, but just as importantly for creating the warmth and welcoming atmosphere through your story. I think we all can say that we share in it, so thank you so much. I'm very much honored to be part of the deep and impressive history of our gathering place, as well as the reason that we're gathering tonight. When the Canadian Club Toronto was first established in 1897, it served as a space where esteemed business, political, and community leaders would gather, break bread, and discuss the issues of the day: the political economy, Canadian sovereignty, and the place of our young country at that time in an evolving and even shrinking world already. Tonight, we've turned Malapart into a veritable museum to mark our 125th anniversary and to take you back on a journey that reflects so eloquently the history of Canada itself. I encourage you to take a moment to explore these emblems and the artifacts. You'll see them in the hallway just outside of our space tonight. On January 17th, 1924, the headline from the Toronto Telegram took note of the diverse opinions expressed in the speeches at the club's 25th anniversary. And with the typical rhetorical flair of the day, it read something like this: orators told of everything about Canada, from its unity to its disruption. So, a century after that celebration, our club has become truly a technicolor space for celebrated guests and for brilliant and distinctive discussion. Our diversity is now all-encompassing, from opinions to lived experiences, whether they be gender, orientation, race, culture, religion, language, or socioeconomic status. This podium, one of the longest running in the land, continues to enjoy the distinction of hosting preeminent thought leaders, politicians, inventors, adventurers, artists, business people, and entrepreneurs. Booker T. Washington, Dr. Frederick Banting, Winston Churchill, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, Amelia Earhart Putnam, Nellie McClung, William Lyon Mackenzie King are just but a few of those who have graced this podium in the past. Our club would not have been able to sustain this level of interest and success without the dedicated efforts and interest of our members, guests, sponsors, and speakers over all of these years, all 3,623 of you. And I'm so pleased that the 200 or so of us gathered here today are representative of exactly that spirit. We are indebted to those past and present who have contributed to the Canadian Club Toronto being the most reputable and respected venue for Canadians to connect and to share. TD, thank you for supporting our celebratory event tonight. And Canadian Bankers Association, we are appreciative of your support all season long in this 125th year. Now, a timeless theme that has been explored by the club is the notion of Canadian unity. As an adolescent nation, we strove to forge our own identity within the context of the British Empire. I think those of us with teenagers in the room may be able to relate a little bit. In a country that boasts rich regional differences and diversity, building a unified Canadian identity hasn't always been an easy job. Examining and understanding this challenge was one of the seeds, in fact, from which the Canadian Club movement was born. So tonight, let's continue our club's tradition of dialogue and discourse by engaging with three of the country's most well-known and well-respected former provincial chief executives. I'll introduce them in a moment. All have taken this podium before, and I'm thrilled to welcome them back again this evening. And so let me... We can get you a room, too. All right, let me do this then. Christy Clarke, former Premier of British Columbia. As the longest-serving female Premier in Canadian history, Ms. Clarke led the government of British Columbia from 2011 to 2017. Her political legacy includes leading the nation in job creation and balancing no less than 5 consecutive budgets. Feels like a long time ago that we did do that. I'm sure we'll hear about it tonight. The Honourable Jason Kenney, former Premier of Alberta. Mr. Kenney served in political life for 30 years and was a prominent figure on Parliament Hill as well, with cabinet roles such as Minister of Multiculturalism, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, Minister of Employment and Social Development, as well as Minister of National Defence. He led the United Conservative Party to victory in 2019 to become Alberta's 18th Premier. And of course, Kathleen Wynne, former Premier of Ontario. Yes. Hometown favorite. Our province's 25th Premier is known as a trailblazer. She is Ontario's first woman Premier and the country's first gay government leader, heading the Ontario Liberal Party for 5 years until 2018. She entered provincial politics in 2003 and had held several cabinet posts, including Minister of Education and Minister of Transportation. Prior to political life, Ms. Wynne was an educator as well as a school board trustee. And of course, moderating this evening's conversation is the anchor of TV Ontario's flagship current affairs program, The Agenda with Stephen Paikin. Yes. Steve, as we all know, has worked in media for more than 40 years and has moderated 6 election debates. Most recently, and you can find a copy outside if they're still there, in fact, he has published a book about the Canadian Club's most famous honorary director, the Right Honourable John Turner. Entitled John Turner, An Intimate Biography of Canada's 17th Prime Minister. We are very much honored that Steve will lend his wisdom and deep appreciation and knowledge of Canadian political history to the podium this evening. I'm just setting the bar. Steve, esteemed premiers, it's my pleasure to pass the Canadian Club podium to you.
That looks like beer. Looks like beer. Looks like beer.
It does. Is that a
Am I
Molson?
here? Thank you very much for the
There we go.
I think, am I here?
Wherever you like. Sure.
I think they told me I was supposed
Okay.
Well done. Sorry that we interrupted.
I was told to
There we
Where do you
go.
want me to sit, Colin?
There we go.
Okay.
Sure.
Right.
Thank
This
you.
is
People
not
propping
beer.
themselves up at the bar.
No, it looks like beer.
I think the bar crowd needs to sit down. Then.
So it's starting already, is it? Here we go. Okay.
Okay, I've already been reminded that I'm the only one who lost an election
Well, that's not what I
to
said.
get out of politics. Christy she didn't lose, Jason didn't lose, but you lost, Kathleen. So,
No, nobody said that third thing.
no, that was in my head.
I think, wouldn't you prefer to remember this time as the 10th anniversary of when you actually won your leadership in the first place?
Yeah, let's do
There you go.
that.
All right, there you go. All right. Okay, I'm going to, first of all, welcome everybody. It's great to see such a full room. And we've all had association with the Canadian Club in one way, shape, or form. You folks have spoken, and I have reported from. First time I reported on a Canadian Club event was probably 41 years ago.
Wow.
I think Marc Lalonde was the finance minister of the day, and that was my first time covering a speech at the Canadian Club. But I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative here just to talk about the most famous honorary director that this club ever had, John Turner. And in case Joseph didn't mention it, or maybe he only mentioned it once and it bears mentioning again, yes, copies are for sale out there. And you know, you're going away for March break and not too long. You're going to need something to read by the beach, so help yourself.
It's very good.
Well, she's read it. She thinks it's
very
good.
good.
Yeah. And all these three are mentioned in it, actually. So, you know. I would love just to start with some memories of him. And you all knew him. And Christy, you knew him from the time you were like 3 or 4 or something.
Yeah.
So tell us, how is that possible?
Well, because my dad was a federal Liberal, like in British Columbia in the Trudeau years, and there was, like, or kind of in those years where there were no federal Liberals in British Columbia, and
it was a phone booth party.
Yeah, basically. So my dad was the president of the Riding Association, and back in those days, if you couldn't find a candidate, which he never could, he would have to be the candidate. He would have to be the candidate and run for office. So he ran a couple of times for the federal Liberals to disastrous results every time, but he became, as the riding president in 1968, he got to organize the delegate selection meeting. He'd been a frat brother in the betas at UBC with Mr. Turner. And so they'd known each other, and they were both sporty guys and that sort of thing. So my dad was 195 Club, and the way they organized, you're gonna love this, the political people in the room, the way they organized the delegate selection meeting in those days is my dad phoned up everybody in the Riding Association who supported John Turner. They all came to my house.
Yep.
And they all voted and decided who the delegates were going to be.
Yeah.
And we sent a full slate of delegates from Burnaby Central to the federal to the federal convention for John Turner.
That's how it worked.
And that was how it worked. And then after that, in 1984, of course, I worked for him in Vancouver Quadra. I just out of high school, and kind of got to know him in his second iteration as well. And
you won the riding for him.
Well, that would be an exaggeration, but I knocked on a lot of doors for him. It was, it was close, right? We all thought Iona Campanola had a chance to win, and that it was tough. I can tell you, it was tough sledding in a West Side riding, even for a man of the stature and reputation of John Turner. But he got through. He made it through. Thank
One
goodness.
Liberal in BC in that election to win.
Yeah, the only one.
The one in Western Canada.
West of Thunder Bay, you're right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's Axworthy and him.
Axworthy won in
Winnipeg.
84. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
And by the way, Brian Mulroney, I talked to him about your book after he'd read it around Christmas.
And
one of the things he said was, he said, it was a fantastic, he phoned me about your book. Like, he didn't phone me, he phoned me about your book.
Wow.
Because you mentioned my dad in it. Yeah. And he said, it's a great book, you gotta read it, Christy. And he talked about how in the debate with John Turner, that he felt like it hadn't been fair. He felt like he hadn't been fair to John Turner in looking back at that famous 1984 debate. He wasn't full of regret.
Yeah, right.
But he said, looking back at it and reading your description of it, it's one of those things. You look back as a politician, you say, I wish I'd done some things differently.
Mr. Turner got a modicum of revenge 4 years later, for a little while.
Yeah, he did.
He
for
bested
sure.
him that night.
He did.
One
He went from
stroke
40
of the pen.
40 to 80 seats, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, your relationship with Mr. Turner goes back to your grandfather, actually.
Yeah, well, similar in a way to Christy. My grandpa was a member of the 195 Club, which meant anybody who voted for John in the 1983...
68.
Sorry, the 68 leadership and stayed loyal to him all through all of those years. Mm-hmm. My grandfather actually ran for the Liberal nomination in York North against Barney Danson in 1968. My grandpa was Canada's biggest dance band, big band leader for like 30, 40 years.
Mark Kenney.
Yeah, and his Western Gentleman. And so I grew up as kind of like an extended member of that Turner circle. My grandfather never quite forgave me for eventually becoming a conservative.
But you were a Liberal for a long time.
I was a young Liberal, right? Very active, very pro-Turner.
That's how we knew each other.
I was Ralph Goodale's EA, famously. Yeah. And, but, you know, I guess the theme here is national unity. We had a pre-chat. It just occurred to me, Mr. Turner, an immigrant, arrives in Canada as an immigrant child, grows up first in a mining town in the interior of British Columbia, also in Ottawa, goes to school in Vancouver and Montreal, becomes an MP in Montreal, and then later is a doyen of Bay Street. I mean, he really understood much of the country and also came from that old school of civility. Now, you could be cynical about it. It's kind of Toronto Club, Mad Men era civility. But you know what? All of this like radical polarization that we will complain about tonight, well, at the starting point of that civility was to assume that your adversaries were actually acting in good faith and respect them. And I'm sure there's a whole section in your book I haven't read yet, Steve, about how close he was to Tories. I mean, he virtually saved John Diefenbaker's life on the beach in Bahamas?
Trinidad and Tobago, I think.
Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. People don't imagine that. One of the top Liberals going into the water to save a Conservative Prime Minister. These days, it probably would have just submerged him. But...
You know, the book is available out there if you haven't. Okay, just letting you know. Now, you met him much later in life, yes?
Yeah, I really only knew John Turner in the later years when I was going to political events, and he would come, and he was this presence at those events, and you know, always said to me, even though you'll read in the book, didn't support me in leadership.
Right.
Fine.
You're over it?
I'm over it.
Okay.
But he always offered help. You know, he would always say, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." And it felt like he was kind of watching over us in some way. And I also think that it was important to him to stay involved. You know, I think he loved the life, and he loved the connection, the political connection, and wanted to be part of it. So, and I just have to say, that civility and the when I read the book, I almost called you and said, "It's so male. It's such a boys' club. It's so clear why we are where we are." You know, it's so clear what formed us as a society. You know, and the values that even the civility. It was male to male civility.
Mm-hmm. It's
you know?
true, absolutely.
And that I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that's what it was. And I think, you know, when you read the book, that comes through in, you know, with such clarity. And he was a man of another time, obviously. But I don't think we can pretend that that's all gone away. You know?
Yeah.
So
it was the fraternity brothers from UBC.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of, it was the world he lived in.
So yes, he was an immigrant, and yes, he went through all those things, but he was a tall, beautiful-looking, athletic, white, straight man. Yeah. Right? So, and that's great.
You say that like it's a negative thing.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm really trying not to say that as a negative thing. I'm just making an observation.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important observation because if I'm a young woman reading that book and I'm trying to figure out where I fit, or if I'm a person of color reading that book, there is nothing in that story where I can find myself, you know? And so the extension of that is, what have we done that's changed that allows people to find themselves?
Yeah.
Thus endeth the sermon.
No, great
question.
question.
Can I bookend that though with this? Later in life, Mr. Turner was so incredibly supportive of me as a young woman in politics, and always encouraging, and always really, I mean, he changed with the world, I think, you know. I mean, it certainly represented a period in time. It's the Mad Men Toronto Club group.
Yeah.
But I do think he evolved too.
It's so interesting.
We didn't see that as
you
much.
called it the Toronto Club group because, of course, he tried to get into the Toronto Club and they wouldn't have him. They didn't allow him in, which is why. Now, just before we talk about national unity, all three of you gave speeches at the Canadian Club during the course of your premierships. And let's just take a moment here and talk about sort of one particular moment that might stay with you from those experiences. And Premier Clarke, I guess yours might have something to do with John Turner again.
Yeah, John Turner heckled me. I was out doing a speech. You know, we started this LNG project in 2011, and I'm trying to raise money for, you know, trying to get confidence. The feds are all like, "You're crazy. This is a stupid idea. It will never happen." And you know, everybody just thought it was a dumb idea, and that I was never going to be able to pull it off. So. I'm pitching it, and I did this big speech about, and it was back in the day when I had to say, LNG stands for liquefied natural gas, and here's how it works. And Mr. Turner is sitting there in the crowd, and he might have had a drink or two.
No.
Did you say a drink or 12? What did you say? No.
There's a chapter on that.
And I'm just sitting there, and I'm giving my speech, and I'm talking, and Mr. Turner would go, you know, "Well, that's right, Christy." And then that would be fine, and then he would go, "But you know, I mean, I think you should think about it." And he's like
live commentary
on the speech. He's kind of like Q&A in the middle of the speech, and I'm trying to keep going, and I'm kind of new at the job.
A former prime minister.
And I'm being heckled by the former prime minister. And at the end, I said hi to him, and we got a chance to chat. But it was completely harmless, but it was very unusual.
Now you know what it was like being in Stephen Harper's cabinet.
Oh, boom. There we go.
Boom.
Okay. Premier Kenney, a memory from speaking at the Canadian Club.
Well, yes. I think 3 days after I became Premier of Alberta, I spoke to a lunch crowd at the Royal York, and I think they told me it was sold out in one afternoon when they opened the tickets, and that surprised me. It was like 600 plus people. And when I was introduced, I mean, at first I was a bit nervous, you know, and I was this troublemaker with sharp elbows coming in from Alberta, landing on Bay Street, and didn't know what kind of response I would get. But I was introduced, I got a standing ovation before I'd said a word. Normally we should just sit down when that's done, right?
It's over.
And then I was interrupted by spontaneous applause many times. I'd been to a lot of Canadian Club events, and that was not normal, pretty often, a thoughtful but restrained crowd. And then I got a nice standing no on the way out. And, you know, the message I brought was, Albertans are proud Canadians. We are big Canadians. We believe in the original vision of the Federation. And we've contributed massively beyond our scale to the prosperity of the country in so many ways. But please, Central Canada, Toronto, national government, understand where we're coming from and stop strangling us with policies that inhibit our development as an economy. And I guess the response I got from that was a sort of an affirmation from a lot of people in this city that may not have agreed with everything I said, but at least a basic sympathy. At that time, Alberta was going through, we were in the 5th year of a recession, massive out-migration, addictions crisis, a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And I was genuinely touched by the response I got from this group to say, we hear you, we respect you, and we want you to be part of Canada.
Great. Premier Wynne.
So I'm just trying to, I spoke a number of times at the Canadian Club. I think just before the leadership, I laid out our plan and our platform. But I also think I was protested. So yeah.
Duh.
Duh. But I always think that's a healthy expression of our democratic process. And to be honest, I mean, standing ovations, yeah, they happen at the beginning, and yeah, sometimes throughout. But what a protest does is it gives you an opportunity to engage with the audience in a way that
Oh, it was in
I
the room. The
actually
protest,
love.
there was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I was never keen on people being kicked out, and wanted to hear what they had to say. So, so that's my memory of, yes, great crowd, civil crowd, has done a huge service, I think, for the country over the years, over the 125 years, and also has allowed for dissent, which I think is so important. That's really what.
Sounds like one of my caucus meetings.
There you go.
Do you notice how much funnier he is now that he's out of office?
He's a riot.
He's got the beard going and everything. I mean, this is neat. This is neat. If I may be permitted an observation, I remember Kathleen Wynne speaking at a packed, it was the concert hall, I think. It was the big room on the mezzanine level at the Royal York, and you gave a speech, no notes, PowerPoint presentation, did it all by heart, took people through a half an hour of what your government was doing, and I remember thinking when I watched that, you could probably count on the fingers of one hand the numbers of politicians in this country that could actually do that. I thought it was awfully bloody impressive.
Thanks, Steve.
I have to say. Okay.
I guess that wasn't the one where I was protesting.
That was not the protest one. No, that was a different one. Okay, all of that to say, we do want to get a sense, given the nature of the name of this club, what all of you think, how all of you think the country's doing today. I mean, the country, as we heard from the headline earlier, the country is always going through something. And are we going through something different today, extraordinary today, unprecedented today? Discuss. Jason, Kenney, you want to start it?
More specifically on like national unity?
Yeah.
But, okay. Well, the cliche, conventional lens for that discussion has always been Quebec separation and Western alienation, right? So my take on the positive side is this. In 1995, we came within a whisker of losing the country. 49.5% of the vote voting for separation. And now for most of the past 10 or 12 years, the average polling in Quebec has been 60-40 against separation. Mm-hmm. So the Parti Québécois is almost non-existent. Quebec politics has changed radically from the national question to something almost like normal politics. And so I think we can celebrate, at least for the foreseeable future, the apparent demise of Quebec separation. I would ask, though, asterisk, at what cost? Because I think one could argue that they ended up winning the Sovereignty Association the PQ always sought. They were able to trample on the Canadian Constitution and principles of pluralism without a word of objection from any of the political leadership in Ottawa, creating effectively a separate constitutional order on issues that we can think about, like Bill 21. Meanwhile, getting $13 billion a year of equalization payments while running a budgetary surplus and being granted powers they don't even possess, like the ability to say no to interprovincial pipelines. John Horgan, your successor, always said to me, how come I couldn't say no on Trans Mountain, but they could say no on Energy East? So I think one could argue, at what cost have we bought peace? In the West, in the resource, I would say more broadly, in the resource-producing parts of the country, there is deep and growing alienation. And I would just ask people, as I did at this club in 2019, to keep an open mind about that, not to be dismissive. These are, typically good, hardworking, loyal, patriotic Canadians who have produced much of the wealth of our country, who everywhere they turn, they're being told that their jobs need to be phased out, there needs to be, what they do is unethical, but while Ottawa continues to generate massive revenues from the energy and other resource industries. And that's how I end up being succeeded by somebody who, I was removed as Premier effectively, in part because there was a widespread perception amongst Alberta Conservatives that I was insufficiently strong in opposing Ottawa policies. Just to give you some context here, when I tell that to people in Ottawa, they can't quite process it. So enough about the regional. I would just add a third dimension, which is the social dimension. And I'm going to be a little controversial here, I'm sure, which is to say, I'm concerned about social unity. You know, the vision of our founders of the United Empire Loyalists, for example, who founded English Canada, was unity in diversity. And we've had this beautiful, imperfect tradition of pluralism, a very liberal concept, often called multiculturalism. And we've built a country that in many ways is the envy of the world because of it. But I am concerned that, motivated by good intentions and our desire to be a welcoming and a country of equality of opportunity, increasingly we are inviting or creating deep divisions on the grounds of race, ethnicity, and other grounds, which can be really destructive. I mean, we have public institutions, the National Arts Centre Theatre, that recently had to reverse course on the idea of banning people of certain races from attending theater performances. We have the same phenomena at our many of our public universities, increasingly at our school boards, dividing people up based on race and ethnicity. I think that is profoundly illiberal. It's certainly contrary to the spirit of pluralism, and I think that's the bigger challenge when it comes to national unity in a larger sense.
Okay, a lot to unpack there.
A lot.
Christy, Clarke, what do you see?
Well, I think Jason is right about the issue of Quebec and kind of settling the Quebec issue by surrendering. And there's no doubt about that. I don't have as much concern about it, though. I mean, I think on the issues of some of the specific bills that they brought forward, there are clearly issues with individual rights. However, if you look at it in this whole, I think provinces should have more rights in the country. And in fact, I think we should have the rights, provinces should have the rights that are set out in the BNA Act as the country was envisaged in the first place. And you know, I've never been in federal politics, so I'm not such a softie on this thing as you are.
You're more in the Daniel Smith camp.
Well, no, but you know, I think that I would say, Steve, I think that the incursion of the federal government into areas of provincial jurisdiction, which are antithetical to the idea on which this country was founded, which really recognizes that in a very big country with hugely diverse economies, the federal government can't run everything. It has to be provinces that are making those decisions, especially on the economic issues, because provinces are big enough as it is. To manage those economies is hard, even at that level, which is hardly at the ground level. So I think, my issues, the things I would point to in terms of national disunity would be, first, the federal government's incursion into the areas of provincial jurisdiction. Provinces need to be allowed to innovate, do things differently, show different models. We need in Canada, we need competition, healthy competition between provinces to prove what can work and what can't, and to recognize that each province is unique. I also think, though, that in Canada, even if we accept that that's the case, and certainly that hasn't been the case for the last many years, where federal overregulation is just absolutely killing our ability to create wealth in this country, particularly from the resource sector, but in other sectors as well. We have to think about the fact that the federal government is not just making these incursions into provincial jurisdiction, they are also, I think, increasingly dividing the country. And that's a matter of tenor and tone. And if you think about the great prime ministers of Canada, think about modern memory. Think about modern in my lifetime. Think about Brian Mulroney and Jean Chrétien from two different parties, and how often they used to stand and talk about the things that hold us together as a country. That was what they focused on. They understood. They would stand up and be proud that they had elected an MP in every single province of Canada. Nobody cares about that anymore. They want to get elected with 37% of the vote, and they don't care where it comes from.
Or 31%.
Or 31%. Mm-hmm. And thank you for that correction. That was important. And in most of those, in that 31%, are 10 or 20 ridings that the governing party has won by less than 1%. That isn't country building. We need policy. What I decry is the lack of uniters in Canada. We need people who are going to talk about the things that we care about, that bind us together, because if prime ministers are not doing that, and instead leaders of the opposition, prime ministers are dividing us, this country will fall apart. So my last thing on this is this. If we look at the United States, we all feel pretty happy. We think, oh boy, those guys are in big trouble. Look how great we are. They're all fighting with each other all the time. Well, my view of the Americans is different. They have a constitution that they care enough to fight about. They fought a revolutionary war to make their country independent. They have giants of history that they look to, like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and depending on where you are in the political spectrum, guys like JFK. They have things that bind them together, ideas. And ask yourself as Canadians, what are the big ideas? What is the history that binds us together? And if we don't have a prime minister reminding us about that, we are lost as a country. And I would argue the greatest threat to our country isn't actually federal incursion into provincial jurisdiction. It isn't the idea that people in Quebec don't care about the resource industry. It is the tenor and tone of our politics, which has become so divisive, setting provinces against each other, dividing us along what we believe in terms of social issues. And I mourn for the future if we do not get that fixed, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Premier Wynne. What do you see out there?
So I think that you guys have, you've identified a really big conversation that pieces of which will happen. I think the questions about constitutional position and placement. I mean, it's interesting, Christy, when you talk about the incursion of the federal government into provincial jurisdiction. I think one of the things that we got to grapple with in this country is the reality of cities being the creatures of provinces and not having the authority and the power to do the things that they actually could do, right? But that's not tweaking. I mean, that's something that would have to be a discussion. And we're, I don't think we're interested, and I want to come back to where I think we are, what we are interested in right now, but I don't think as a country anybody's saying we want to have a constitutional debate right now. And the only starting point for a constitutional debate is with the government-to-government relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. That is the entry into any constitutional conversation. So we can talk about federal incursion, we can talk about asymmetry among provinces every time we do something, we can talk about Alberta and Saskatchewan taking on the sort of stance of Quebec in terms of wanting to have that kind of autonomy. I think that's a threat, and I think it's something that would have to be part of that bigger conversation. But honestly, what I think we're grappling with right now is partly that lack of a national project that you're talking about, but I think it's exceptional. You asked what's new and people are very grumpy. They're very unhappy and grumpy.
About what in particular?
Well, I think there are a bunch of things. I think that obviously COVID knocked the stuffing out of us, and it's been a long time. It's not been a short time. It's been a long time for people to manage. And, we can sit here, and most of us have come through, and I'm making an assumption and I shouldn't, but by virtue of the fact that we're in this room, most of us have weathered this time pretty well. But there are people who have for 2, nearly 3 years been worried about putting food on the table. They've seen their expenses go up. They don't know what comes next. They don't know how their kids are going to do. And I think that fear creates a lot of grumpiness, And I think the fact that people were separated, like I'm very worried about this. I'm very worried. I've been worried about social media since it took off and took over. But I'm very worried about the isolation and the kind of the agoraphobia, the fear of going out into the world that I think a lot of people are feeling. So if we think about community by community, if individuals are feeling like that, and then there's a narrative out there that the world is broken and that Canada's broken and that we're going to hell in a handbasket, the two feed on each other. And I really worry about how that gets interrupted by all the things that you're talking about. Because, this country is worth fighting for, you know? We are worth fighting for. There's a reason that people want to come here. There's a reason that we rank in the top, I don't know, whatever, in any list of places that people want to be. So I think that in order for us to really get a handle on how we go forward, I don't think it matters who the government is. That fundamental dislocation that people are feeling needs to be addressed.
I love that encomium to Canada. I'd like to bottle that. I agree with every word of it, what you just said at the end. Sadly, much of our public discourse, often amplified by our Prime Minister, is that Canada isn't the envy of the world, that we haven't built this great, welcoming, pluralistic society, but that we are a genocidal settler state, and that is effectively illegitimate, that lowered our national flag for 6 months, and we didn't for one day during the death of 65,000 Canadians in the Great War. I really wonder, but this comes back to what I was talking about, which I think is the excesses of this spirit of wokeness, if you will, which is, if I could just, I didn't interrupt you, Kathleen.
You tried to.
Which is to say, let's pick a lane. Are we actually the envy of the world? I actually happen to believe that we are. I also think that we are imperfect. It's a constant project to make the country better, to make it more welcoming, to make it more equal. But this discourse that is now very strong in our colleges and universities, and increasingly in our politics, that we should be ashamed to be Canadians. I mean, when I heard the people who were proudly on this podium of the Canadian Club, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, why haven't we canceled him? He increased the Chinese head tax by tenfold. He banned blacks from entering Canada. He brought in the continuous journey policy that led to the Kamagado-Maru catastrophe and the blockage of South Asians from coming to Canada. He massively amplified the Indigenous residential school system. But we haven't canceled him. I'm glad that we haven't canceled him. We should learn from his gross mistakes, celebrate his successes and those of our founders, but selectively we seem to be trying to cancel a bunch of them. And I just say, look, I'm not arguing for diminishing crimes and mistakes of the past or surrendering on the work of progress, but I agree we should be proud of Canada. I agree it's worth fighting for.
You want to come back on that?
Well, I just, you just kind of slid in the wokeism issue, and I just need to challenge it, because when you say that, when we talk about pushing back against wokeism, what we're saying is we're going to push back against 50 years of fighting systemic racism, of fighting misogyny, of fighting homophobia, laterally Islamophobia, and I categorically reject that. I'm a lot older than you are, and I know that 50 years ago, when I was 19, there was a lot wrong in this society. There was a lot that really excluded people, and we had our work cut out for us. And that work that people in this room and so many others have done over all those years is to wake us up, whatever the language is. It was to wake us up to the systemic exclusion that was happening in our society. So to turn around now and say, we got to push back against that, I mean, sure, we need to examine what it is we're doing. I get that. But I really think there's a danger in being defensive about the past. Because if we're defensive about the past, then all the students in my class at U of T are going to walk away from us. And we need them. They come from all over the world. Their families have come here to make a life, and they want to make a life. But if we are defensive about, the white guys, and again, this comes back to my comment about John Turner. If we're defensive about what those men built, then we're not going to be able to build the new house that is Canada.
I'm arguing globally for pride in Canada, recognition of our imperfections, not defensiveness.
I think you need to break the tie here.
Oh boy! Wow. Well, can I just start with this to say we do live in the most pluralistic society in the world. I mean, I spoke to the Aga Khan, the refugees that came from Uganda not long ago, celebrating their anniversary of their arrival in Canada, and just reflected on the fact that Canada is a project that's still ongoing. Like every new set of immigrants that come to the country builds it and changes it. And we are one of those very few countries in the world where you can't look back and go, you know, there was a better time than this. There aren't very many places in the world where that's the case, because we are constantly being transformed by all the people that are coming. Now, but here's, I guess, my contribution to this conversation. For me, it's the means by which we accomplish those goals of pluralism. And so, you know, there has been, and I think this is part of what you were speaking to, Jason, a change in the last 5 years probably about how we go about that. And I think we should be careful about that. We should be careful about silencing speech. We saw, you know, I'm careful about how I say this, but because I'm a huge advocate for vaccines and did not support the truckers' protest. But I can say this, when the federal government decided that it was okay to go in and take people's access to their private money away and draft the private sector banks into doing that, it was a step too far. And the fact that that was something that has kind of become acceptable, those kinds of actions in our conversation in Canada, tells me something about, it gives me some source to worry about where this conversation is going. So I think, you know, I'm 100% with you on pluralism and inclusion, and especially as a feminist, but I will say, I do think the way we go about it is something we should be careful about.
A lot of those people that took me down politically, so I don't have...
So I have more time for them than you do.
I don't have a lot of personal sympathy for like the anti-vax sentiment, but I certainly have I respect their rights as citizens, their rights to protest legally and so forth. But it's the constant, and you alluded to this, constant turning the knife of division. I'll give you one example. Last week, the Prime Minister's statement for the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is the day of the liberation of Auschwitz, referred to, recently we've seen the Nazi flag flown in Ottawa. Well, my recollection, I stand to be corrected, there was, I think, one incident of a swastika in that month-long maelstrom of protest in Ottawa. One, and whether it was actually one of those folks or I don't know, but it's outrageous, disgusting, terrible, everyone must condemn it, agreed. But to work that into somehow a parallel to the murder of 6 million Jews is at the very least disturbing. And at any average hard left protest in this town on any given day, you're going to see a hammer and sickle. And you're not going to get a prime ministerial statement twisting the knife. I'm just suggesting that kind of, that is not the sort of leadership that we had in the past.
But Jason, is this, I'm sorry.
Well,
I just have to ask, is this not a bigger conversation than a conversation about Justin Trudeau? I mean, this is a bigger conversation. And
but national leadership is important.
Well, of course it's important, but I don't think we're going to have the conversation we need to have about this country if we stay in our partisan lanes. You know, we've got to be able to talk about the bigger project without identifying or vilifying a particular individual. I think we have to.
I'm talking about vilification.
And this is where I jump in and say, he's standing up for a reason, because we've come to the end of our time.
Come on, we just started.
Oh, no, we don't.
He's standing up for a reason.
Oh, you villain.
But I think we can conclude by saying, I think we now all know, if we didn't before, how these three won elections and became the leaders in this country that they did. I know you all would join me in thanking them for coming here tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I think we've done our job. There we go.
They love standing ovations. They let you know at the beginning. Come on, guys. They love standing ovations. These premiers love a standing ovation. Wynne. I'm just joking. I'm kidding. I remember being trapped in Maple Leaf Gardens 10 years ago. It was terrifying, but we got out. My name's David Simmons. I'm the wasn't that fantastic, everybody? Wasn't that fantastic? I often say that stories have power, because stories give us license to shape, to reimagine, to feel included. Stories draw the circle that pulls people in. Stories have words that give us meaning and build us up. And as Premier Kenney and Premier Wynne exchanged, those words can also tear us down. And what I'm so proud of is that for 125 years, Canada's story has been told from this podium in a respectful way, in a thoughtful way, and in a kind way. And I'll tell you that as much as we could anticipate Premier Wynne and Premier Kenney and Premier Clarke having a varied set of opinions, they will be drinking things in the back of the bar, laughing and celebrating the beauty that is Canada. So thank you for joining us tonight and for being here. We really do appreciate it. And Steve, thank you. I don't know if you know this, but Steve Paikin just wrote a book about John Turner, and it's for sale in the hallway. You can get a copy. He might even sign it for you if you get a copy. And if you can't, and for those of you watching online, it's available at online retailers. I'd encourage you to go to a Canadian online retailer and purchase it as well. I intend to read it in March. Yeah, really. That's later. Steve, thank you for being a wonderful storyteller and an even better Canadian. We appreciate you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Simmons. Hey, Scott, how you doing? My name is David Simmons. I am the immediate past president of the Canadian Club. And one of the things I love about being immediate past president is I was not the first black president of this club. Here, on the first day of Black History Month, I was not the first. I was not the second. Let's hear it. I am also a flaming homosexual. And I'm very proud to say I was not the first homosexual president of this club. I was not the second openly homosexual president of this club. We are a bunch of queers, and I'm very proud of that. And I was thrilled to follow a tremendous female president of the club who you'll hear later tonight, Anita Jo. And Jo, look at what other 125-year-old club has a past president's line? That is Joseph Lowe, David homosexual Simmons, and Anita McQuaig. I think that's pretty awesome. Okay, now that I've totally gone off script, let me introduce. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you to take photos. Colleen's so happy I'm not president anymore. I was supposed to tell you to take photos, post them online, tag the club, hashtag the club, and here's why. Because one of our lovely speakers from my season of the club, Air Canada's CEO, and now you're all listening, has given us 3 flight passes or gift cards? Flight passes that might be gift cards. They're gift cards, but you will get a chance to win 1 of 3 gift cards. So post them online. We will be selecting your memories, your favorite memory of the club. It could be when Kathleen Wynne had a banner fly down in her session, or when she wore her beautiful taupe suit. I was there that day when you gave that speech in heels for 30 minutes with keynote presentation, and Eye of the Tiger marched her in. It was amazing. Okay, so please do that. Let me introduce our next speaker so that we can have more drinks. Our next speaker is a professor of English at the University of Toronto. This is going to be really special as we talk about the beauty of Canada. Our next speaker is a 7th generation African Canadian and Mi'kmaq descendant. George Elliott Clarke is a poet. He's a novelist, playwright, and a critic. And his collections are impressive and expansive. We're so thrilled and privileged to have him here. George, the Canadian Club podium is yours. Please join us.
Good evening. Perfect response. This is the first day of Black History Month. Yes. Something to celebrate. And I'm very honored and pleased to be asked to address this very august audience. And I know that we've heard recently from the Prime Minister, as well as from the course of the panel discussion that we just had, which was so enjoyable and enlightening, that we shouldn't be really concerned about the Constitution. And I assure you, I am not going to bore you with any such discussion about the Constitution. But I do want to say that I think that the idea that somehow peace has broken out about our fundamental law of this country is a bit of a misnomer. And as a matter of fact, when I was the 7th Parliamentary Poet Laureate, 2016 and 2017, I convened my very own Constitutional Assembly. And I want to welcome everyone to do the same thing. You should just, you may as well bring about your own Constitutional Assemblies and invite your friends and neighbors and think about how we could improve the fundamental laws of this country. So here are the results of the sesquicentennial Constitutional Assembly that I chaired and called at the University of British Columbia in November 2017 on indigeneity. Recognize indigeneity as the fundamental characteristic of Canada and interpret the Constitution in this light. What I mean when I say that is that we should replace the Crown as the fundamental authority in this nation with, instead, indigeneity. If we were to do that, everything in this country would change to reflect the fundamental characteristic of this nation, which is its indigeneity. Relocate sovereignty to a plurality of legal representations in a plurinational state inspired by Indigenous peoples and cultures. Recognize Indigenous languages as official languages. Add a 4th level of government that acknowledges Indigenous self-government and self-determination. Dedicate 1% of all taxes collected to Indigenous peoples, First Nations, as a perpetual rent. Transfer underlined title from the Crown to Indigenous trusteehood and stewardship and guardianship according to Indigenous conceptions of citizen relationships to the land. Recognize Indigenous autonomy in regards to managing traditional and ancestral lands. Incorporate into the public education system the promotion of Indigenous mindsets and ideologies. The Government of Canada must negotiate in good faith with Indigenous peoples the administration of the National Capital Region. I believe that if we were to undertake these measures, again, everything in this country would change. We would cease to be a Eurocentric focused nation and become a nation where all of us become Indigenous, because all of the fundamental characteristics of this land would reflect that underlying reality. In other words, let us overthrow the idea that this should continue to be a settler state, a settler-defined state. Let it instead become an Indigenous-related state, an Indigenous-governed state in which all are welcome. Oh yes, we should abolish the monarchy while we're at it. It's about time, I think, and we should follow Barbados with that. On the environment, create a Canadian Charter of Environmental Rights and Responsibilities. Recognize the fundamental right to live in a healthy and sustainable environment. Include the rights of nature to preserve, protect, and restore nature's beauty, diversity, and integrity. Protect from development at least half of Canada's terrestrial and marine area, establish an Office of the Public Advocate charged with preservation of the environment, ecosystem, and natural resources, to report annually to Parliament and derive its funding from a 20% tax on all resource extraction activities in Canada, Mr. Kenney. Provinces shall ensure that both public and private primary and secondary education systems dedicate at least 5% of class time to the study of environmental preservation. Public education curricula must foster positive relationships between citizens and nature, with an emphasis on the morality of the inclusion of nature in civil society. Enshrine a right to health care, including publicly funded dental, vision, prescription drugs, including marijuana, family planning, and fertility treatments. Recognize the right to clean water as a human right, beginning with reserves. Recognize a right to public transportation. Recognize a right to public control of broadcasting. On multiculturalism, break down or dissolve fiefdoms of privilege, legislate more affirmative action and or employment equity programs targeting visible minorities. I will say so-called visible minorities. Instruct political parties to offer diverse lists of potential candidates truly reflective of the diversity of the Canadian people. Recognize third languages as official where numbers warrant. Recognize Canada as a multilingual nation. On foreign affairs, identify Canada as a pacifist, demilitarized nation. Amend Section 146 to allow for the admission of new provinces, including territories not presently part of the territorial limits of Canada. I personally would welcome Turks and Caicos. Invest powers over declaration of war or negotiation of peace with the Prime Minister, subject to parliamentary oversight. I want to thank you very, very much for paying such close attention to the constitutional ideas that came up from my sesquicentennial Constitutional Assembly, those very few modest amendments, and I will, they are modest actually, but we can start with recognizing the indigenous nature of this nation and changing the Constitution to absolutely reflect that fact fundamentally. But I will conclude with a poem. It's a very brief poem. It's from this book, which is not for sale tonight. And it's my latest installment of my epic poem called Canticles. This is Canticles 3, 2022. The poem is titled The Poetics. And it's by an African Nova Scotian, Africadian, African Baptist woman whose name is Louisa Bailey, who was, in fact, a historical poet of the African Baptist Church. So Louisa Bailey says about poetics, "We, my penmanship be sly, my style pure, cunning, and thus I carve out poetry, classic verses unshy, letters earnest and sagacious punning. I trust in moral backbone to keep my poesy keen. Thus, no line needs further hone. It's clean as a well-picked bone, and words say what they mean. And words say what they mean. A reedy flute shouts out notes in mutual tumult. Likewise, upon my ink, contention floats, ideas war as my pen spouts, truth shining neath inky guise. Truth shining neath inky guise. Ain't my ink both bucket and axe, as bottomless as the brain, and as sharp as blades biting backs, blunt and brutal are my whacks, my contrapuntal blows of crackling pain, my contrapuntal blows of crackling pain. And I will close by mentioning that I do have a book for sale. Only $20, and anybody who's interested, just approach me at the back. And also I have copies of my memoir, which has just come out in paperback, also available for sale. Again, only $20, only cash. Thank you all so very much.
I don't even know how to begin to follow that, but I'm going to try. Professor Clarke, on behalf of the Canadian Club, thank you so much for that eloquent and passionate remarks. Your poetic message was a perfect conclusion to this evening's program where nobody held anything back, and I'm sure the debate will continue after at the bar. My name is Anita McCuitt, and I am a past president of the club. I was president during the 2020 to 2021 season, which was an entirely virtual season. And I have the very important job of doing the thank yous tonight. It's the important job of the thank yous. Shh. First, the Canadian Club runs with an extremely lean team of staff, and I continue to be blown away by what they're able to deliver with this small and mighty team. Colleen, Kathleen, Caitlin, and an army of volunteers, just amazing. I'd like to thank one of our current board members, Tracy Pierce, for chairing our 125th celebration, and the committee who helped bring it to life, including Dale McDermott, Glenn Parkinson, and Karen Restool. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I actually want to thank all of the board members, past and present. It's a very demanding and active board, and I know you've put countless hours into programming, marketing, budgeting, and just ensuring that you're preserving the legacy of the club. So thank you to all the board members. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge all the past presidents who took the time to serve the club and really promote our democratic and eloquent country that we enjoy. We have a few past presidents in attendance today, and I'd like to honor them now. I won't make you stand, but maybe just raise your hand and wave, or raise, yes. So Bruce Sellery, 2019 to 2020. Nalini Stewart, 1997 to 98. Libby Burnham, hi Libby, 95 to 96. So thank you, presidents, for all of your leadership. We would not have made it this far without your dedication. So to celebrate all that we've done in our birthday, we have this miniature cake. And I'm going to invite David and Joe to join me. We'll do a little cake cutting. There is actual dessert at the back for everybody. Okay, the cake cutting is done. Thank you to TD for your support of this evening's event, and we hope to see all of you at more club events soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening.